good afternoon, and very good afternoon. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Viewgraphy. Uh, Today we are going to talk about gears, but not the way you were expecting. It's more about how to use the gear and which gear needs to be used in which way to get the maximum, or shall I say, efficient output. Okay, let's say we all have different tastes of photography. Most of us are in shooting birds, some shooting wildlife, some shooting portraits, only portraits, some shooting landscapes. Some are good in street photography, some are good in product photography. Everybody got different tastes, right? Some are like me who try to do everything, uh, event photography, landscape, nature, portrait, black and white, street, blah blah blah. So there are lots of stuff people like me who try to cover. But what kind of tool we should focus on for the type of shoot that we like to do? That's the whole topic of today. All right, like what you have, what you're trying to shoot, and what you should be focused on. Now, let me put things into perspective. Like, for example, landscape. Okay, let's say I am a landscape shooter. I love nature and I love to shoot landscape. So, what kind of gear I should be focused upon? Of course, when it comes to landscape, people immediately think, okay, I have to buy a widest angle lens and it should be f2.8, like 1424 or 1224, or recently announced Canon 10 to 20 f4, but people love to go for 2.8. All right, there are some Sigma lenses 14mm f1.8 or 1.4, something like that. So the wider the angle of view and the biggest the aperture we should get. So we try to look for those kind of images because we are a landscape shooter. But the thing is, instead of focusing on the lens, we should be more focused about the camera. Now, why I'm saying camera? Because the camera, the amount of dynamic range or shadow recovery or highlight suppression, all these, things which you need to process the raw file in post processing, it heavily depends on the camera and its SNR firmware or analog to digital converter, how good they are. So if you are, let's say you are shooting with 5D SR, Canon 5D SR, 50 megapixel camera, all right, but at the same time you are shooting with Nikon Z7 II at the same time. And then in parallel, you have Sony A7R5, 61 megapixel. Now, these three are high megapixel cameras like Nikon Z7 II. I'm not talking about Z9 or Z8 now because Z7 II is the only camera which can gives you uncompressed raw files. In Z8 and Z9, you get compressed raw files. So I'm just purely talking from uncompressed raw file perspective where you can get the maximum juice out from the camera. So Z7 II. Then we have Canon 5DS or R5. Let's say 5DS because there's more megapixel, 50 megapixel, 5DS or 5DSR, and then A7R5. So these three cameras are there. But I prefer to go with Z7 II because it gives you more latitude in post processing. Canon 5DSR, despite of having 50 megapixel, but it cannot shoot more than 400 ISO when you need it. It do have a very good white balance, but high ISO capability of Canon 5DS or 5DSR is not good enough. Whereas Z7 II can shoot easily, 6400 ISO up to 12800 ISO in some cases. Whereas Sony A7R5, it will struggle at high ISO. It will start giving you more noise. So that's where the Z7 II will take the lead over the rest of the two competitors. You can check all you want from DxO Mark or whatever, but Z7 II, as per my experience, because I used all three cameras, Z7 II gives you more latitude in post processing, which is mandatory for us as a photographer. So even I'm going to have the same lens, and I'm going to use that same lens over all three cameras, Z7 II, Canon 5D or Sony A7R5. My output will be better with Z7 II. So it means that I should focus on the camera rather than the lens because I'm a landscape shooter. See, that's the point. So my focus should be more over the camera rather than the lens if I'm a landscape shooter. Now, let's switch to portrait. Portrait is all about blurring the background and all that crazy thing. So it means that let's take the similar scenario. Let's go for Nikon, Canon, and the Sony. Let's talk about 24 megapixel cameras. Where we have Z7, we have ZF newly announced 24 megapixel or Z6 II. Let's say Z6 II. Then we have from Canon, we have R3 24 megapixel. All right, or R8 24 megapixel full frame. Okay, then we have A7R3 or A7 III, A7 III or A7 IV, which is around 24 megapixel, and A7 IV is more like 32 megapixel or 33 megapixel, something like that. So we have all these three cameras, and we are going to use the same Sigma. Sigma is because Sigma is having a universal mount for all these three cameras, all these three brands. Of course, I'm going to have 1.2 lenses for 85 1.2 for Nikon, 85 1.2 for Canon, 85 1.2 with Sony. I can use all of them. But 85 1.2 is not available in Sony mount. Sony doesn't have 85 1.2 for their E mount because the mount is small, not big enough. So Sony cannot make 85 1.2 lenses for their native E mount. So that's why I'm stuck with 85 1.4. And I'm taking Sigma because it's applicable on all these three brands. I can take, Sigma lens and I can use on all these three cameras. Now, assume instead of shooting at 1.4, I'm shooting at f2, 85 f2, 85 f2, 85 f2. So, what kind of effect shall I look for when it comes to portrait? Portrait is more about subject separation from the background. So I will be even camera is having very good dynamic range of Z6 II or R3 or R8 from Canon or Sony A7 III or A7 IV. Despite of having they are very good in high ISO or low light capability, good dynamic range. Nobody cares about the dynamic range when it comes to portrait. Everybody cares about how good this bokeh is, how good the shallow depth of field is, how much blur I can get from the background or front, how much sharpness I can get across the frame edge to edge. So portrait is more about the lens rather than the camera body. So if I'm a portrait shooter, and of course love to have I would love to have more megapixel so I can pixel peep all the skin tones, but that looks creepy to be very honest. 24 megapixel is more than enough to shoot any decent portrait. You can shoot up to A3 size print. Alright, so 24 megapixel is more than enough, and 24 megapixel will give you a very decent dynamic range with maximum number of pixels at the same time. If you go for 45 megapixel portrait, you will start having noise, 400 ISO, 800 ISO if you're shooting in natural light like that. So it's not gonna helpful for you. You are going to have noise after 400 ISO, 800 ISO. That's where the 24 megapixel camera will take the lead. You can shoot up to 3200 ISO and still get away with decent clean images because the bigger the pixel, the cleaner the image is. So that's why I'm taking 24 megapixel for portrait as an example. And Z6 II or ZF, Canon R4, R3 or R8, and Sony A7 III and A7 IV. These are all 24 megapixel camera except A7 IV. So all these three cameras are good for taking portrait, but I should be more focusing about the lens because of the subject separation, because of sharpness, because of bokeh balls at the back. So people more care about the bokeh balls rather than, the amount of noise you can get when it comes to portrait. So if I am a portrait photographer, I should more focus on having a good lens. Landscape shooter, I should be more focused on taking good camera. So these two genres are covered. Now let's talk about sports action wildlife. Okay, sports action wildlife is a very mixed genre where you are focusing both on the camera and the lens, to be very honest. Why? Because when it comes to sports action wildlife, bird shooting, you need more frames per second and you need longer lenses. So it means that you should focus on both. You should focus on the camera, which gives you maximum frames per second and should not break your bank, you know, should not put holes in your pocket. At the same time, you should have a lens which gives you a zoom capability, all right, up to 500, 600 millimeter, and should have decent enough big aperture to shoot in low light, you know, bird silhouette, sun setting, stuff like that. So this is where the trade-off, this is where you have to decide what should I focus upon. Should I have more focus upon the lens and I can get away with any camera? Well, it depends on you and type of shoot that you do. If you are spraying and praying to get a shot, like you just like machine gun style, try to shoot blindly, of course you will more focusing on having a camera with maximum frames per second. And you will try to get like 20 frames, 30 frames per second camera, high-end camera, like Z8, Z9 or ZF. From Canon you will be R8 or R6 or R5. You will prefer to go with R5 so you can crop and much and all that. Or when it comes to Sony, of course, A1. You try to get 50 megapixel, 30 frames per second, blah blah blah. So again, you'll be more focusing on the maximum frames per second with maximum resolution. So you can crop and still get away with, enough details in the images. Then you will, once you decide the camera, then you switch to lens. Okay, I should more focus on the lens. To be very honest, in my case, I would focus more over lens first. With a decent lens and a decent technique, I can get away a decent shot with any camera as long as I know how to use that camera in an efficient way with the lens that I have. So in my case, I put the lens more priority than the camera. Not the camera first and then I look for the lens. Because most people think, oh, we can take 200 millimeter 70, we can do 70 to 2, I have 70 to 200, I'll put a teleconverter and then I use 50 megapixel camera and I can get 300 millimeter and I can take bird shot and still crop. I don't know what kind of logic is this, to be very honest. Still, go way above my head. Way above my head. I prefer to have a lens first, so I have the reachability when it comes to sports action wildlife subjects, bird subjects. Once I get the reach, then I'll switch to crop sensor camera. Why? Because crop sensor camera give me maximum number of pixels per unit area, more than full frame in most of the cases. So if I'm going to crop it, I still get enough detail even after the crop. That's my approach. That's why my preferred combo, it's Nikon 200 to 500 f5.6 constant aperture lens and Nikon D500, which gives me 10 frames per second with 20.9 megapixel in crop sensor, which is equal to 45.7 megapixel full frame detail. Okay, with 20.9 megapixel, I'll get the amount of detail exactly equal to 45 megapixel D800, D850. Okay, so and then I can get 10 frames per second raw, uh, fully professional body, two card slots. Like, you just throw that camera anywhere and still that camera can take the beating. And they are not going to break my bank. Both lens and the camera cheaper than the expensive 500 f4, 400 2.8, or D5 or D6, or Canon 1DX, or Sony A1, stuff like that. So that's my solution for sports action wildlife. So in my case, I put lens the top priority and then I look for the camera. And still I can work my way with crop sensor camera once I have the lens first. I can use any crop sensor camera. Of course, I won't get, let's say if I'm using D3200 or D3400 camera, which is entry level APS-C, or let's say Z30, which gives me 11 frames per second, and it gives me animal IF Z30, 11 frames per second. So on paper, it gives me more, you know, when it comes to compares to D500. But Z30 doesn't have the deeper buffer like D500. I can maximum shoot like 20-30 frames per second. D500 I can shoot with 200 frames buffer. So when it comes to sports action wildlife, lens is the first choice, then the camera. But still, by using Z30, I try to make my way in. Okay, I just my approach. This is just what I'm saying. I would do. Maybe in your case, you probably go full frame. That which is totally fine. It's your money. You can spend whatever the way you like. So, sports session wildlife, lens first, then the camera body, or maybe in your case, the camera first, then the lens. It's 50-50. But again, it's the user. It depends on the user in the end of the day. All right. Product photography. Product photography is all about details. It means that in order to get the details, you must have a pixel camera with maximum number of pixels, which you can get full frame, 50 megapixel, 45 megapixel. But imagine those cameras are expensive. What shall I do? Use crop sensor camera. Crop sensor 24 megapixel, which is equal to 54 megapixel full frame, or 20 megapixel crop sensor camera, which is equal to 45 megapixel full frame. So you can shoot product photography even with crop sensor cameras, even with mobile, with 40, 50, 200, 100 megapixel, because product photography is all about detail and the light. Of course, when it comes to getting everything in focus, you will be shooting at f8, and f8, every lens, even then an average lens, is going to give you sharp result. You don't need expensive lens for product photography because you are shooting at f8, and it's all about control light in your studio. So you, after the camera, you should be more focusing about the light. Then comes the lens when it comes to product photography. That's my understanding. Maybe in your case, if you are a product shooter, you have different approach. But that's how I see product photography. Now, after that, event photography, weddings and all that, corporate shoots. That's where lens comes first. Again, same subject separation, couples, intimate couples and intimacy, hugging and all that. So it's more about the lenses. You can shoot with any camera, but you need 85 and 35, 35 especially. Everybody photographer loves 35. So why 35? You use 35 focal length, use on any camera, any full frame camera, and you can get away with very nice images. So wedding is all about lenses, not the camera. Okay? Then what's next? Product, wedding, landscape, nature, macro. Macro photography. It's the name macros tells you. It's all about the lenses. So lens first, you can get away with any camera. prefer to go with crop sensor. So you get maximum number of pixels per unit area to get maximum details. Crop sensor, macro. Then what else? Hmm, let me think. Landscape, portrait, wedding, macro, events, product, sports section, wildlife, bird photography, low light shooting, any kind of low light. Let's say concerts, clubs. Low light, it means that you're talking about high ISO. High ISO means you are, when it comes to low light, you preferably going to think, okay, I should go for 2.8 lens, or should I go for 1.2, 1.4 lenses, like 35 1.4 or 28 1.4 or 50 1.4. But you forget that when it comes to low light, the lenses gives you enough aperture, but if the light keeps getting lower and lower, you need a camera which pumps up the high ISO and still give you clean images. So that's where the camera gives the high priority over the lens. That's where the low megapixel camera will going to have eventually a better result over a high megapixel camera when it comes to low light. Lower the megapixel, bigger the pixel size, it means that good for low light. Higher the megapixel, smaller the pixel size, it means bad for low light. So when it comes to low light photography, camera is your preferred choice. You should more focus about the camera to invest in a good, decent, low megapixel camera with new updated SNR firmware like A7, S3, or like Canon 10 and 12 megapixel, like ZF 24 megapixel gives you ZF or AS Z6 II, even Z5, Canon R3. Right now, it's a king of low light as per the DxOMark 24 megapixel. His score is way above that 4000 something. It's too much. So that's the thing. Low light and all that. So I'm going to wrap up my video now. But the whole idea is to give you what kind of gear you should be focusing. It's a camera or the lens. It depends on the type of genre that you shoot. In this video I just break down the things. If type of the genre that you shoot, you should be more focusing on the camera or the lens. I hope you like this video, and I'll bring some interesting content in future, something like this. Till then, till next content. Take care. Bye.